My name is Kim McCormick, and we appreciate for those of us joining in Alexandria this morning. Thank you very much. Beautiful, beautiful day. We do have several people online who are dialing in via webcast. And then we're also taping this, and we're going to be using it for several people who weren't able to join us live. And we'll make sure that you have that as well. If you participate in this, you're welcome to share with people. Our purpose today is to walk through some information and some bits of pieces regarding powerful partnerships. What we're going to do is take a look at some experiences that we've had. You have the wonderful pleasure of hearing from Dan McCormick and Joe Haggerty, who combined have 70 years, which is more than their ages, experience in working with, yeah, you like that? I thought you'd like that. More than their age years of experience working with for-purpose organizations. And it's our passion, it's what we've been doing. We've been helping organizations either create foundations or figure out how to expand and strategically improve their for-purpose individual organizations so that we can survive and make sure that our missions have impact. So that is really the purpose of what we'll be doing today. Just a couple of housekeeping internal things. We have some refreshments in the back. You're welcome to use that. If you would like to use the restrooms, it's straight down the hall and to the left. We are going to try to keep on track and finish today at 11:30. There will be some points for question and answer. And for those of us who are online, we'll be trying to get your questions in via email. And I had suggested if you had an email request to just email it to Kim at mcc- it's like a -group.com. And I'll catch it that way. And then if you're here sitting in the room, then we'll get your questions live. Before we begin, I'd like to spend just a few moments talking about our first speaker, Dan McCormick. So Dan McCormick is my father, actually. We've been in this business for several years together, and we're still getting along, which is good. Anyways, as I mentioned before, he's been working with for-purpose institutions for over 30 years. He began when I was a very young girl, working with educational institutions and helping them set up foundations. And that kind of morphed into working in many of different industries, including health, including finance, including environmental factors and agencies around the United States and into Canada and other organizations overseas as well. And in the process of working on setting up foundations, we also became involved in this purpose of helping organizations collaborate together. And so we have quite a bit of experience to share doing that. We had a wonderful opportunity to work with many United Ways, and that's where our relationship with Joe Haggerty, our second speaker, came into play. And Joe is going to be sharing with us some of the experiences that happened recently with our work with United Ways and what he's been working on with in his new position as the CEO of the Alexandria Chamber of Commerce. So, with that, I will hand this over to Dan to get started.
Well, good morning again, and thanks for being here. This is like coming home. It's like old home week, because Joe and I have worked so closely together. Hi, come on in. You just missed the cartoon. And so we worked together so closely since 2008, actually. And Joe had a distinguished 35-year career with, isn't that all right, with United Way, and most recently as its Chief Operating Officer. And I was his direct report for collaborations and consolidations and mergers for United Ways. And he'll tell you a lot more about that when the time comes. But today, I think we're going to do something a little bit different. Frequently, when we do these types of discussions with folks, we talk a lot about the process of kind of how you actually do it. But over time, we've learned that the process is first of all, it's pretty much ordained and pretty much already set up by codes from the states and statutes of the states you live in. It's also dictated by bylaws and the types of organization you are. And what people we've learned really want to know about is the kind of the making of the sausage of the politics. There's an old joke about politics is like making sausage and you really don't want to watch that being done, Well, but this is a time when you probably do want to know how it's done, because it's such a process of really understanding what you and your organization can do and how you can kind of go about doing it, not just the little technical administrative part of it. So today we're going to focus our energy around that. And it starts really with thinking about this, is that, this note that we know something is happening around us and it's all speeding up and all these things are taking place, and we find that what's tried and true for our organizations that was so successful for many, many years in the past no longer works, or we find that it's not as successful as it was before, or we find that our giving population is more fluid than it used to be. We find that social media is more of an impact. We find that the immediacy of everything that we're doing and taking care of is just happening so fast, and external forces are coming at us so quickly that we have to find ways to adapt to that, and we're learning that size matters. And I think that's one of the central themes of what we're talking about today, is that the size of an organization in today's environment matters. And so, just as a note, I wonder if anybody knows what all of these that you can barely see, and there might be a darker shade to help with this. But do you happen to know what all these organizations have in common? Well, let me tell you. These are among, there are others, but these are the primary organizations online that you can register your not-for-profit organization with, and they will help you raise money through various social media devices. Quickly, overnight, tomorrow morning. So think about your organization, your brand, and how long it took you to grow to the capacity that you're at today. And think of the fact that I could leave here this afternoon, drop by the courthouse down in Alexandria or over in Arlington, and file appropriate documents. It might take a couple of days for it to get through the system as a non-profit corporation, and I may not have my tax exemption yet, because that's going to take me 5 or 6 months, but I could register myself, go online, and potentially start making money in a couple of days from these third-party sources that make it happen. So what that does for us is it really changes the process, because it's all part of a whole philanthropic pie. And while raising money is not everything, it certainly is what drives our mission-related efforts. So you can set up this charity and start raising money instantly. And look at what is happening to our field. It's growing in leaps and bounds. There are nearly 40 nonprofit organizations per zip code. Now that doesn't mean that every zip code has 40, but when you divide it out, there are nearly 40 nonprofit organizations per zip code. So when you think about that in the context of the numbers, welcome everybody. When you think about that in the context of the numbers of what our competition looks like and what our opportunities look like, one might think that's probably a little too many for the pie, because the whole philanthropic pie is not growing at that as fast as the number of organizations who are grabbing pieces of it, which means that every piece of the pie is smaller. Every piece of the pie is smaller. And that's one of the things that begins to drive organizations into this kind of discussion. And in addition, we get slattered and splattered by some of the negative things that are happening. I don't know whether you've gotten a call from a veterans organization recently, but there are 59,000 with the word veteran in its name, many of which have been found to be unscrupulous in their work as the U.S. Navy Veterans Association. One of the things I liked about this organization is they listed as their, president of the organization a guy named Admiral Byrd. And it was no relation to the Admiral Byrd, so just so you know. But anyway, and of course we all get This organization was actually, the Cancer Fund of America was actually enjoined by the IRS just 2 years ago for raising more than almost $200 million, of which less than 3% went to the cause. So that means that our brand needs to be elevated in order to be more attractive not only to our constituencies, but to protect kind of the sanctity of the field. We kind of have that responsibility, don't we, to protect the sanctity of the field. So the good news is things are going up. Giving is expected to increase. Interestingly enough, environmental causes are leading the way. And that hasn't happened since the spill of the oil tanker Valdez. That was the last time that environmental causes really led the way in all giving from the standpoint of percentage of growth. And I think many people attribute this to increased awareness of global warming issues. But anyway, and then one of the interesting things that's beginning to happen is some of our funders are beginning to recognize that we're not just project-oriented all the time. And sometimes basic support and basic help is important. And there are a number of organizations that have decided to make their giving to nonprofits less restrictive. And that's a good thing, too. And so, what if this thing would run? I guess I need to be over here. There we go. So, we're finding, though, that we're beginning to recognize that while all of this is going on around us and all these external factors are hitting us and all of these negative things are in play and all these barriers to growth are in play and all these opportunities that I just shared with you, some of them are in play, that we are increasingly becoming dependent upon one another. And one of the reasons which is unusual for our field. And the reason it's unusual for our field is because we as nonprofits spend a lot of time trying to show up as different. We try to show up as unique. Our program is faster. Our program is better. Our program is meaner. Our program is leaner. Our program reaches more people. Our program is more specialized. Our program has higher levels of expertise and research underneath it. Why? Because we want to show up to our funders as being the best. We want to earn their gifts. We want to earn the support and the faith that they have in us when they support us. We want to earn that, and we do that by showing up differently. But in showing up differently, we also increase not only the competitive environment among organizations, but we create an instant barrier about collaborating and working more closely together. Because we're trying to show that we're different from you, and we're better than you, and look, and then when all of a sudden we go like, we should be working together. It's just, we've created this barrier field of failing to collaborate. And I don't know about those of you in the room, but how many of you in the organizations you work with spend a lot of time talking to other not-for-profits, or even in your field or out of your field, going out and talking to other nonprofits about what they're doing and what they're up to? Not too many, but a couple. That's good. And but I've found in working with some of the largest charities in the world that they're kind of self-contained, and we don't go out and do a lot of that. And yet, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of nonprofits already beginning this whole collaboration thing. Most CEOs believe in surveys that some more integrated form with other organizations are helpful. And here's the key. 55% of the mergers, 55% of funders want to see more nonprofit mergers. They think that 40 per zip code is too many. They think that the millions of nonprofits that are out there today are too many. And I know, and Joe may address this with United Way as well. That's one of the things we've learned about United Ways. One time we were doing a merger with United Ways in Philadelphia, and I was on about the 40th floor of a lawyer's office building that had windows like this, and I said, everybody look out the window for a minute. How many United Ways can you see? How many United Ways can you see? And from that office building, if you count a church spire that was about 5 miles away, you could see 5. 5 United Ways. So what we learned is, does this make sense in today's world that we're butting up one another, competing for dollars, pushing our funders into multiple campaigns for United Way when in essence we're all trying to do the same thing? And so, quite frankly, the merger was pretty much done when everybody looked at the window and go like, this doesn't make sense. And so we merged a number of United Ways into Southeastern Pennsylvania United Way. I think that was 6 or 7. And we huddled up into a regional effort. And quite frankly, things are better. So you can spend time, this is in your packet, and we're going to make this available for download later, but basically this chart that's got a lot of stuff on here is saying that in the merger game and the share support function, these other kind of joint programs and collaboration associations, that the majority of the players get out of this what they expected. They get out of so when they have an expectation of what some kind of collaborative environment is going to be, they meet those expectations. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why we think that's the case. But the point is, these from exceeding all goals to achieved all goals to mostly achieved goals brings us down to here. So all of this is good stuff, and did not achieve is down here pretty small in the bottom. So the point is, the vast majority of those mergers and other kinds of events, when they were surveyed, said, we did what we intended to do. This worked for us. And that's what we're finding anecdotally in all the work we're doing across the country, is that organizations that go through this and really look at their opportunities and really think about how they will be better together, get what they want out of it. And that's an important thing. So why is my little button not working so well? I'm sorry, I guess I'm too far away. Oh, that's probably helping right there. There we go. So why does all this matter? Well, I tell you why it matters. We can no longer afford to be individually in silos. We can't afford that luxury. And we're also recognizing that what our nonprofit or what our for-profit friends have known for years is that sometimes it's better to collaborate than to bill. Sometimes it's better than to coordinate with one another than to compete. Sometimes it's better to consolidate than to remain totally separate. Sometimes it's better to share something that's expensive, like enterprise resource software that's big enough to run the world, and we're running 200,000 people or 100,000 people or 50,000 people or less, and we pay the same amount of money when that same software could run 40 organizations. And so we can no longer afford the luxury, as I indicated, of being in a silo. Nonprofits can no longer afford that. It's too expensive. It's too expensive. It takes away from what we're here for, which is our mission purposes. We can't own everything. And what we've also learned is that more people and resources applied to a problem results in greater impact. More resources. So for every dollar we spend on something that's not direct mission related, reduces our impact. Because we're a mission organization, not a money organization. We're about mission. We first and foremost are about mission. And so this is the deal. And the question I think we want to ask ourselves today as we think about going through this process is that here and now, at this moment, we need to develop systems, processes, and relationships that will help us be better positioned to capitalize on opportunities. And for every organization, as alike as we are, that's unique. And that's different. It's different for your organization, it's different for your organization, it's different for yours. Every organization has unique differences. And even though we may be in the same 501c3, some subset, 509A1 category, and technically we're in something like that, but the bottom line is we are more similar than we are different. We are more similar whether we're dealing with children's hospice, or whether we're dealing with YWCAs, or whether we're dealing with homes for disadvantaged adults, or whether we're dealing with education. We are more similar than we are the same. And if there's one thing I've learned through all the years, it's that we are more similar than we are different as nonprofits. We like to think of ourselves as phenomenally unique, but we aren't. And so, with that, we think, I hear this statement all the time: everything's fine. Everything's fine. So we fool ourselves into thinking all is well. You know, we kind of bet on the come. You know, if you're played craps, which I don't, but I just know that term. Yeah. But you know, we bet on the possibility. We believe in the possibility. We believe that our next event is going to pull us out. We believe that some big donor is going to, lightning is going to strike in our favor, and we believe that that somehow or another we're going to get to a new place in time. We're going to get to a new effort, a new status, and we make strategic plans, believing that if we conduct these strategic plans, all will be well. And so I hear that all the time. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. And so I went over this before, but our very name, nonprofits, is a misnomer for who we really are. And so, and by the way, that sets a little tone that we've discovered. I mean, business guys go, "Oh, they're a nonprofit organization," not realizing that we're some of the best effective run entities in the world, because we make all kinds of wonderful things out of nothing. You know, and we can't just raise the price and say, "You know what, we made 45 refrigerators last month. We only made $80. Let's change the price." You know, we don't have that advantage. You know, we're some of the best run organizations in the world as a for-purpose entity rather than a non-profit entity, which is the way we like to think of it. We like to think you're here for a purpose. You're not here. You happen to be not for profit. It happens to be a tax structure, but you're here for a purpose. And when you're here for a purpose, then our focus about how we continue to develop becomes mission-oriented, and that's when collaborations and mergers are successful, when they're mission-oriented. So we've learned some statistics about smaller organizations and their financial resources. We've learned that, for instance, there's a honey spot of successful organizations that's about $2 million. Below $2 million, you're kind of always struggling. At $2 million, now you have the ability to plan, you have the ability to be a little more stable. Something downturns a little, you don't go down. And we've learned that about $10 million is the real honey spot. When you get to about $10 million in gross revenues from all sources, in United Way we call that resources under management, but when you get $10 million from all sources annually, now you're an organization that has the ability to really launch yourself into a true brand. So while money's not everything, it's important to think that these markers are helpful to us, and these markers are beneficial as we think about our organization as a whole. And so we've got to get a place where our financial capacity and our human resources are limited, because unfortunately these go hand in hand. If we don't have enough money to hire the right people and hire the smart people and to hire the people that are willing to give their time and help, it's hard for us to get to the next level. And so it's like chicken and egg, you know. We don't have the money, we don't have the people. Okay, we got the money, we got the people, and then we got the people because we got more money, and then we don't have enough. So it's the chicken and egg kind of lift that our human ability to improve and our financial capacity to improve have to go arm in arm. So the question is, how do we get there, and how do we get there quicker? And this is not my favorite thing today. I don't know why. I'm so sorry. Here we go. So here's the big question that we want to answer today and want to think about as we're talking about our whole thing. Are we in the right form to have the greatest mission impact? Are we doing the best we can do? And of course, we have a position because of what we do, which is we think organizations generally are better together. We think you can do more together. If you can find the right partner and you can create the right relationship with the right partner, you can be better together. And that's what our experience has taught us. That's what all of our work with United Ways have taught us. That's what all of our work with American Cancer Society taught us. That's what all of our work with Girl Scouts of USA taught us. That's what all of our work with Arthritis Foundation and another 40 or 50 or 60 major mergers, as well as some small ones, have taught us, that organizations are generally better together. And so that's what I'd like for you to have in mind as I introduce my good friend and working partner from way back, not so far back. He just left United Way in January, February, I think. And I think he got tired of being on the road, quite frankly. But Joe Haggerty and I have worked very, very closely to become we were kind of the lead team at that time on helping United Ways think about being better together. And Joe will fill you in on all that data as we welcome him to the party. So thanks, Joe.
Okay, so I think 2007, 2008, and in the United Way we have over 1,200 United Ways in the United States. We're now operating in 41 countries, where we raise $5 billion a year, every year. So we had to ask ourselves some of these questions. Does our structure make sense? Would we have set it up this way if we began today? And the funny thing is, we would get a group of United Way professionals in the room and say, are we set up properly? And they would say, no, let's make some change. Thank you. Right. Okay, let's make some change. Someone would say, well, how about mergers? They'd say, no, we don't want to merge. We're independent, we're important, leave us alone. So what should we do? So that discussion goes on and on and on, and it continues today. The other thing is, we've all traveled a lot. Certainly I was traveling a lot around the country and around the world to help look at our structure and see if we had the right structure. And you get off the plane and somebody picks you up and they take you to meet the board members. And the first word out of every single board meeting is, we just want you to know we're different. Okay, we are not like those other places. Okay, and I would say, well, I'm in the United States. You all speak English, most of you anyway, and I see some churches and some synagogues and some mosques. You look a lot like the town next to you. And they'd say, no, they're not like us at all. You cross that county line, they are different. So this thing that we have about being different and unique, and in some ways we are, okay, and all of us as individuals are, but it gets carried to an extreme, and it's often the reason why we don't change. And especially, I can tell you, we're using the United Way network today, and there are other networks we could use because it's prevalent. It's prevalent. We also, so 1,200 United Ways in the United States means we are set up as independent charities. Every United Way is an independent charity. And many of them were set up 100 years ago. So they don't really want somebody from outside telling them what to do, even though we do have a kind of a group of guidelines to operate by. So we have 1,200 boards. We have 30,000 board members in the United States. And so I like to think, imagine if they were all aligned and they were all the right people and we're all moving, together, the power of that, okay? So, but we don't always have that. So that's what we were working on and trying to figure out. And so in 2007, 2008, a number of for-profit board members on our board, running very big organizations, said, we need to do some consolidations. We have too many people, as Dan said. We had United Ways bumping into each other. They had been set, so in Philadelphia, they had been set up, if it was a carriage ride to one place, that was the border, okay? And that was 150 years ago. But they were still set up that way, okay? And today we have transit systems and automobiles that doesn't make any sense. So you're sitting there and you can see 5, 6, 7 United Ways, 5, 6, 7 CEOs, 5, 6, 7 boards. And we had to ask ourselves, is this the right thing? I remember one of these, he was running a big global company, and he said, Joe, you know what we need to do? You know what it should look like? Go get a consultant to make this happen. I'm like, okay. So 1,200 of them, I know what it looks like. Okay. I also knew all the politics because I had been around and I had been working with all of my colleagues for a long time. So I started searching who's who's doing this kind of consulting. And I basically found two different types of organizations, very, very big organizations like IBM Global Services, Accenture, McKinsey. These folks are doing mergers all the time, and mostly for-profit mergers. And then they have a couple of their newbies that they put on the nonprofit mergers, okay? So, and they're pretty expensive. So, because we priced them out, pretty expensive. And then I found out there was a group of, I'll call them boutique consultants. And American Cancer Society was going through some major merger activity. The Girl Scouts definitely were going through major merger activity in that time, about 2007. So I talked to all the folks at those places, said who's working with you, who's doing the best job, and a couple of names kept coming up, but one of them was Dan McCormick. So I called Dan McCormick just out of nowhere. I didn't know Dan. I didn't know anything about him. I Googled him, and so I had written a book about nonprofit mergers. But so I said, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to know what you're doing. I want to know how you're doing it. And we've got a lot of work to do in our network. So Dan and I met, and in the end, after we looked at a number of people, I felt that he was not a big organization, but that was probably the right thing for us. He knew how to get into the merger discussion and to keep it going with people. And I read his book, and I thought, oh, this is pretty good. I like this. I like this. Including the details, the legal side of mergers and things like that you do have to worry about. So he started working with us, and we agreed to start with a pilot project in 6 different communities, see how it works, see what we could learn, and then we would use those models to share with our network so that people could decide on collaborations or mergers. So, and the reason we did that is we've been in business, I don't work for United Way anymore, but United Way has been in business since 1887. Started in Denver, then grew across the country. But we were facing fundraising issues, and we're facing consistency issues. People, we're not a franchise, but people expect United Ways, especially if they move around, if they're business people, they expect a certain consistency, and we weren't getting that. So a lot of it due to size. 1,200 local United Ways just in the United States, all separately incorporated. Every one of them is a 501c3, and our rules and regulations say you have to keep up your nonprofit status, you have to file your 990s, you have to have the right kind of a board of directors, you have to have ethics policies. So they all have these things. So they're all well run in that sense. But it doesn't go past, I would say, the basics, okay? We did have a number of them that were very small, had always been small, and we had 150 with no staff at all. Just you go to a little town in North Dakota, there's a United Way there, there's a board there, there's no staff. And they do the best they can, and they bring in some money every year. And of course, the 80-20 rule, a lot of our money was raised in the bigger markets. And so we decided that we weren't going to try to merge everybody or have we talked about statewide organizations, but we decided that would just too much pain and too much time spent on the merger activity. So we started looking at the biggest markets in the United States and where there were a lot of United Ways there that had historically developed, and how would we get those groups to merge? Because if we could get 60 or 70 of our biggest markets merged and looking like a model that made sense, that would get us to where we needed to go. So that's what we kind of set off to do. And let's see if we're switching. Okay.
One on the right.
Okay. Hey. There we go. Good. The other thing, so we do have a national board that does set policy. They don't tell the local United Ways what to do, but they set policy, especially on our membership requirements and what's the right thing to do as a United Way. We were concerned that we weren't getting enough lift in terms of national programming. So we were talking about education, income, and health. We had specific programs we wanted people to do. We had models for success, but some people just wouldn't do it and wouldn't take off. And then we couldn't get the numbers back. So when a UPS or a Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Exxon said, what are you doing across the country? We couldn't really give them enough impact numbers to say what we were really delivering. And a lot of what we do is voluntary in our network. So we like to say about when something's voluntary, about 20% will be leaders and they'll jump on the bandwagon and they want to do it. About 60% will say, I'll watch it for a while and I'll come along when something happens that looks good. And 20% say, no way, never, I'm never going to change. Leave me alone. Okay? Some of you probably have seen those kinds of statistics in your businesses. So, but our board members did want kind of be able to do some things nationally. And we had always been about local, local, local. If you talk to United Ways, it's local, local, local. So the world isn't local, local, local anymore. The company that used to be a little company down the corner that you could depend on was probably bought out by somebody else. And in fact, it's going on right here in Alexandria right now. Because we have these nice little shops on King Street, and they're going to be replaced by some national brands, and people are very worried about that because we're losing the local, local, local. And a toy store just closed down here. And what everybody's saying is, I used to go there, and it was the greatest place, and I used to bring my kids there. But everything they're saying is, I used to. All those people buy their toys online. They don't go to that store anymore. And that's why they closed. So, and there'll be a whole different type of store there in the future. So just to give you a sense of some places we worked, and I can give you stories on each one of these. I would say so one of the things about collaboration on mergers, it's often driven by a third party, okay? In Kansas City, they had 4 United Ways, and they actually, if you know Kansas City, it's in Missouri, but if you cross the river, there's actually Kansas City, Kansas, okay? And so you're on the border, and it was unclear to people who was doing what, and the business community said, we think you should consolidate. And so Kansas City is a big city, but it's not that big when you're there, and there was no reason why we couldn't have one United Way serving that area. So there were a lot of people that didn't want that to happen, including the people running those 4 United Ways. They were worried about jobs and security and things like that. But Hallmark Cards, the biggest employer there, said, if you don't do this, we're not going to support you in the future. Boy, did we have a merger happen pretty quickly there. We put it together, and things happened. So it's basically there's one United Way in Kansas City these days, and we have a top person running it, and I think people feel very, very happy about that, very comfortable about that. Chicago, we had a situation, if you can believe this, 50 United Ways in the Chicago area, what they call Chicagoland, and that's how it had developed. And they would all defend their little, I'm in Schaumburg, and that's different than Elgin, and and we're different we don't like those people in downtown Chicago. So there were all these things going on. Anyway, we just felt it was completely inefficient, and we took a stand nationally that we're going to we can pull a charter, okay? We're going to take your charters away, and we're going to have one United Way. So it was kind of the forced merger, and that happened within a year. 50 United Ways merged into one. So there's one United Way there now. And again, I think we have a very good board and good people running it. We have places where pieces of things happen. New York City, we wanted a bigger model there. We ended up getting some United Ways in New York to merge, and we had some United Ways in New Jersey merge, and a few in Connecticut merge. They didn't merge into one. But it's also the live-work pattern they call it tri-state on those 3 cities is very strange. People are coming and going everywhere. Nobody really knows where they should they give where they live, should they give where they work, and a lot of competing issues there. So I was on the train one day, and as I was leaving Stamford, Connecticut to go into New York City for one of these meetings, the sign said, Stamford, give where you live, don't give any place else, something like that. I'm like, what kind of a fundraising model is this? They're basically saying these other folks are no good. So that's what we worked with. So Battle Creek and Kalamazoo, Michigan, 2 smaller communities. They just started talking on their own. We worked with them, and they merged. So those two organization mergers are probably easier. There was a lot of collaboration already. They were working together, and they just decided it made sense. And guess what? Kellogg happens to be there, and Kellogg said it makes sense and supported them. So again, another merger that happened fairly quickly. There were 2 CEOs. One became the top CEO, and the other one became the number 2 person in the organization. So some of the politics were taken care of. But those are the kinds of things we learned. The United Way system has written these things up, and we use them as models. I will say, when people think about merger, they think about like a bank merger or a big takeover merger, and they think about saving money, slashing jobs, and it's all about the money, okay? And get the price of the bank stock up, right? That's not a not-for-profit merger. In not-for-profit mergers, we spend a lot of time sitting around the table and negotiating what we need, and that's the way it should be. And that's often, it can be about jobs, it can be about board positions, it can be about geography. But 95% of not-for-profit mergers work because we do it that way. And it's about mission, as Dan said. It's about mission. It's not about money. Okay? So that's a big, big difference. And there's usually, and we often have, and Dan's very good at this, we often have negotiations around people's jobs for a while. That you may not keep your job forever, but we'll guarantee you your job for 2 years or something like that. So if you're looking for a lot of cost savings, it comes, but it may not happen as quickly as in kind of a forced for-profit merger. So that's been, and so we have lots and lots of stories about all of these, and also every one of them when we flew in there, San Francisco said, we're different. We're no, Boston, we're different. Okay, Connecticut, a woman in Connecticut told me, she said, who are you and what do you know about Connecticut? We want somebody who kind of knows us and loves us. So that was my one. I went to school there and I lived there. I said, I went to school here and I lived here. You guys need to merge. Not doing very well. So the other thing we did, and we do look at the statistics. So we can show people how they're doing against, we benchmark, how you're doing against similar markets. I will tell you though, that when you put the bad news up and you show the bad numbers and you say you're not doing well against the rest of the country, they just deny it. They say, well, you don't understand. We had a layoff and we had this and the mayor was sick and we couldn't do this and the Holiday Inn closed so we couldn't have a meeting. I mean, there's a million reasons why we're different and why the numbers don't make any, it's not valid to tell us we're not doing well. We really are. We're doing great. And we're watching this on their revenue and we're watching this on their reporting community impact. So those are things we're concerned about. But what we do suggest is getting senior leaders and volunteers in the room to talk about this and to open it up and to try to build a collaborative atmosphere from the get-go. The forced merger only works if there's a community partner pushing it. So if you're in Battle Creek and Kalamazoo and Kellogg's pushing it, that will work. If you're an outside party like us, like the national headquarters, that's not enough. That's not enough. They can fight you to the death, and you're going to get on a plane and leave, and they're going to be there, and the merger's not going to happen. So this one we're talking about right now, I think some of that's going on. So we felt we needed significant structural change, and we were able to make change in our major cities in the United States. We wanted to do better on our national initiatives as we rolled them out and as people took them and had the capacity to do them. So a big piece of this is about capacity. If you're a small shop with 2-3 staff, often you really can't get it done. Our small United Ways, we're struggling with that. And we do have a lot of United Ways. There's 2 or 3 people there, and they get their information every day from us. We're constantly communicating with them, and they'll say, oh my God, another new program, or oh my God, I got to fill out this form, or oh my God, I got to file a 990. What is that? And it can be overwhelming if you're running a small organization with all the things you have to do, and then all the local pressures you have on you. Social media, we have some United Ways in the United States doing great on social media. Dallas does a great job, but we need impact across the whole country. Okay, so that's the other thing we've been working on, and how does that happen around size? I will say, because we're worldwide now, we're doing a lot of work in countries where we're skipping the United States model. We're going countrywide right away, okay, if it's a small country, especially in Europe, and we're using social media to start, and we're involving the employees of companies and involving them from the beginning before we even ask them to give. So we've learned a lot from this in terms of our strategies at the United Way and how we make it work. So in case you don't know, so the American Cancer Society went, and Dan can give you more statistics on this, but they went from like 17 big chapters across the United States to 1. They consolidated into the national. And Red Cross is doing that right now. If you don't know that, there's a lot of buzz about that. Girl Scouts looked at how many girls they needed in a territory to really make one of their councils function. And whatever that number was, you had to get to that. So if there were 3 Girl Scout councils, they had to form 1. And they had a lot of longtime leaders, professional leaders in the Girl Scouts, and they tried to pay them off from their pension fund, and then the pension fund didn't have enough money, so there were a lot of issues there. Although my daughter's a Girl Scout, and they seem to be doing okay right now. But so Red Cross is kind of interesting. They have Gail there was hired. She was on the Harvard Business School staff, and she's all about consolidation and efficiency. So that's what they're doing. They're consolidating everything, and they're getting very efficient. So it's in progress. It's going to be interesting to see how that all turns out. but they did have the authority at the National Red Cross to make people merge. And so they've been pushing it as best they can. So there are a lot of different models going on. There's a lot going on in this country. The question, I think, for a lot of us, is it just about consolidation? How do you make sure you can... So the Red Cross has to mobilize people locally to help in disasters and in fires. Is a consolidation model going to work for them? I don't know. So those are the questions. So here's a funny thing. So after 35 years at the United Way, and I was very involved in the Chamber of Commerce here, the Chamber of Commerce person left, and they asked me if I would go take that job. And I said, wow, you mean I don't have to be on a plane every day? Well, okay, let's try that. So I'm doing that right now. And so the good news is it's a really fun job, and you're working with people every day, and it's very local. The bad news is the Chamber of Commerce movement in the United States has no rules. No rules. You can start a chamber any place tomorrow. Just so wherever you guys live, you want a chamber, go start a new one, okay? There are no rules on geography. There are no rules about naming. There are no rules about ethics. It is the wild, wild west. There are 5,000 chambers of commerce in the United States. And there's no consistency at all. So they don't care about that, I guess. But from a brand point of view, I think they should. And I went to my first meeting here in Northern Virginia, and they said there's 12 chambers here in Northern Virginia. And we were sitting in over in Fairfax. So I got up and said, there's too many. What are we going to do about it? And they said, who are you? Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. So that's where they are. But same thing. We are seeking partnerships. And we're looking, I think one of the things is if you have business or corporate supporters, they are changing. I mean, things are, it's not the mom and pop store anymore that drives charitable giving, certainly, or that has the money for charitable giving. And one of the things I'm looking at our chamber is how do we make sure the big players are involved? We're so much about small business. But there's a lot of small businesses have the same issues. People trying to run a store on King Street with 4 or 5 people, and now they need to be open more, they need to be on social media, they need to be doing things to bring people into the store. Boy, that's if you're doing that alone, that's a tough way to go. So one of the things we do is show people how they can work together, and do a lot of work with government to make sure the rules and regulations aren't too tough. So, as Dan would say, to the hard facts. Okay, so smaller does mean more exposure. We see, and it's not just in the not-for-profit world. It's every place. Can we meet the demand of our customers, of our community? In the United Way, besides fundraising, we ask, can you deliver impact products? Can you really get out there in the community and do the things you need to do? Mission. So it's always about mission, and it's. I think because it's about mission and not about money, we should be able to collaborate better, but we don't. We collaborate as nonprofits when we can sit in the room and all talk, and then we can leave and go do whatever we want. Okay, we all agree to these 3 metrics, but then we don't do them. So the only time we really are serious about collaboration is when there's money on the table, a job's on the table, or it's a big government grant or a big corporate grant. That's when we actually work together. We have way too much talk and not enough action. But people say they want to be collaborative. They want to be more efficient, and that's what they want. So that's my story, and I'm going to stick to it. Okay, that's what's going on in the United Ways. Right now, in the United Way network, we have 150 United Ways talking to each other about collaboration and merging, and we'll see where that all ends up. But we've had our numbers of United Ways in the United States is coming down, and almost entirely because of mergers, and almost entirely because there are neighboring organizations that have decided to merge. Nobody's really making the merge, and so they are becoming more and more efficient. But it's at a very slow pace, and so there's also the question of pace for your organization. As things change, can you do that? And we also face the challenge. The biggest givers in the United States are big companies. It's the big banks. It's the big transportation companies. It's FedEx and it's UPS. It's Exxon. It's Shell. It's Chevron. These places that still have lots of people working for them. And they demand things, and they want you to produce, both on the impact side and on the fundraising side. And if you're too distributed with too little, not enough decision-making to get what you really need, they're not that interested. They're used to national models. So final thing I'll say to you, because there is debate about the best model and what works. So I was at the Harvard Business School at some kind of a symposium last year, and we all had to do a case study. There were 200 people in the room, mostly for-profit businesses. And the question was, should you be decentralized or should you be centralized? And I said, oh, this is so great for us. So I said, okay, here's the United Way. We're pretty decentralized. What should we do? Half the people in that room, and it kind of depended on the company, said, you need to be centralized. You got to control things. You got to control your costs. You got to control your staffing, your boards. You need more control. The other half said, absolutely do not do that. If you try to be from the top down, it's not going to work for you. You're not that kind of network. Do not do it. And the guy from JetBlue Airlines, he just grabbed me afterwards and he said, be decentralized. He said, that's the only way it's going to work. You cannot don't listen to the people from IBM. Be decentralized, he said. So I think the debate goes on about the best model. It's probably a hybrid, and that's what we're working on. And God knows that's what the Chamber of Commerce needs to work on. So Dan, you want to go? Our questions right here. And if we get any questions from those of you watching, let me know. Questions, suggestions, thoughts in your organizations?
That's a very basic question, and it goes back to your experience. What has been the biggest barrier to evaluating, exploring, or even completing merger?
So I think, so the question is the biggest barrier to exploring merger. I think the people on the inside that are on the boards and the staff, they don't see, the trends are coming at them and they don't really see them. You know, it's like the boiling frog story, you know, you're in the thing and you put the water on, it's just getting warmer. Well, someday you're going to get boiled. So they don't see it. They don't see it. And when you go in, especially if you're going very rationally with numbers and a business case for change, if you're from the outside, they deny it. I think they've got to feel some pain usually before they move. And some of it's in I see people from different businesses. So if you have somebody from a bigger organization sitting on the board, they often say, yeah, we need to really seriously consider this. People from that are very local and from small organizations will tend to say, no, we've been doing fine. We've been doing fine. And we don't really need to change. We've been doing fine for 100 years. I know our revenue's going down, but it'll come back. It's just a minor thing. So it's just a denial thing. And again, some of it is we're different. We're not Buffalo. We can't do what Buffalo did. We're not San Francisco. You don't get it. You don't get it. We're a different community here. So those are the things we hear mostly. And I think on the inside, on the staff side, concerned about jobs. Concerned about we're going to lose. Some people are going to lose their jobs, and we're not going down that road. So, all right. Yep.
Probably for both of you. So there's both of you keep mentioning something different, and I think that we could argue that's more foundation and money led. And so, how do you suggest nonprofit organizations to lead in those conversations if they're not talking about how different and special they are when they're going after the dollars?
So just a couple of, I think you always want to show how good you are, right? And the question for those on camera there is, you know, how do you differentiate yourself, right? So we kid ourselves about, so people think their brand is very important, okay? There's 1,500,000 charities in the United States. Only 5 or 6 of them are top of mind to the American people, okay? So you can spend all you want on brand. If you're the carpenter shelter in Alexandria, you're never going to be a big brand, right? You serve a small territory, and a couple hundred people know who you are, and that's it. So I think you need to be careful about being really honest with yourself about who knows us, how important are we, what are we doing, okay? And sometimes we don't do that. I think showing that you deliver a top quality service, and maybe it's for XYZ neighborhood, and you don't want to be too big, you want to be at a certain size. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think saying we're so different, we're different than the child care center next to us, and that's your case, I don't think anybody cares. And I think it's a weak argument. I think that's all we're saying. So the leadership should be about delivering quality service and doing what your mission says you're doing, but not about we're different than the guy next door. But that's all I'm saying. Dan, you probably have to come up here so folks can see you and hear you.
I think they picked me up on this one.
You're on? Okay.
We did some consulting work a few years ago for the Bill Packard Foundation in San Francisco. And one of the things that started that was they, as a funder, was looking for ensuring that their impact dollars were, had a potential for a broader, for more success, if you will, that would do more. And what stimulated that part of that conversation was in the San Francisco Bay Area at that time, there were 14 organizations focused on unwed pregnancy for younger women. I can't remember exactly how it was characterized, but basically for young women who were having babies who were out of wedlock. And 14. And Hewlett-Packard said, look, we're giving all of you a few $1,000s. Why don't you meld together in some way? We'll give you lots more thousands, and let's see if we can really have an impact on this issue. So that, from a Hewlett-Packard funder standpoint, if I understand your question, was more attractive, knowing that they could impact the overall problem with a large enough scale to show differential, than to parcel out $1,000 for each of 14, or $10,000 for each of 14. They wanted to put $200,000 on the issue, as an example. So I think it's a matter of how you position what you ask for, or how you position how you are still deferential. It's just less competitive and less. So you're hoping that you'll get your share and more for the mission purpose is the I think is the promise of the discussion. But great question.
It's a value question. What is your donor value? Okay?
Yeah, and I think that it's really easy to say that organizations are coming and saying how much they're different, but I really think sometimes that is more foundation-led, pushing that issue on organizations, so the organizations are putting that top of mind.
Good point.
Could be. And again, if you're going to an organization that wants you to be very different, maybe that's a good strategy. Depends on who your donors are, and
Yeah.
so that gets into the whole segmentation of donors. What do people really want? What do they really care about? And that's another issue we spend a lot of time on.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Have you found a general strategy or a set of strategies to start the conversation among a group of organizations where merger is not on their current radar?
Actually, that's a big part of our next part.
We're going to absolutely address that. Absolutely. But go ahead if you have a...
That's coming up. So at least in the United Way Network, we can do that where we see this poor performance. We're going to do it gently, not to use a hammer, to go in and say, things aren't going real. So parts of Michigan, some are on the news these days, things aren't going very well. And so we're saying, so how do you work together with your neighbors? And we do it gently and get that discussion going. And sometimes just let them have the discussion in the room for a while. And then we bring in some consultation to help them. But if things are going well, or people perceive they're going well, sometimes the bigger organizations that we think need to lead say, I don't want to be bothered with all this because these small ones are going to drag me down. And the small ones say, the big one's going to take us over. So you're fighting the size issue right from the beginning. So I think you just have to be, if you're aware of the barriers and you go in around the barriers, and then you can get the discussion going if there's a need.
I actually have a follow-up question to that. Where a lot of the examples that you've cited are common branded organizations. I mean, you have basically American Cancer Societies of different regions becoming the sole one.
Right.
How do you deal, or how do you assure in organizations where you have perhaps slight off-tint missions, but still somewhat general missions, but still preserve the legacy of both organizations as they started? That, to me, I think is the hardest part, especially with founding members that are emotionally connected with the organizations. How do you assure that legacy of both organizations be equally respected?
So I'm going to let Dan talk to that. I see that happening because of the United Way structure. We work with a lot of organizations where that is happening, and there's so much about the name, the mission, and the founding fathers and mothers still being there. Okay. Yeah.
Well, we're going to do a little session here in a couple of seconds on how to get what you want out of these kind of mergers, and one of those big concerns is legacy positioning and legacy of not only the emotional legacy for how the organization is built and how you feel about it, but also specific programming or specific kinds of other activities that are going on within the organization that you feel are important. And while Joe has kind of talked about the United Ways of the world, which is, the largest charity in the world, and I mean, it's a kind of a different, different playing field than the majority of us. I mean, I can assure you that our consulting experiences go from some really tiny ones to some very specific ones to organizations that you might not think of as natural partners at first. And so when there's dichotomy in the way that that these entities begin to try to fit together, there's ways in the organizational documents even to ensure that those legacy demands are continue to be honored and to be met. You can't bind a board forever. You can't. So in other words, if you meld your board, you got to expect that there's going to be some cultural changes as time goes on. But while you can't bind them forever, you can ensure that certain things are carried over and remain in place as long as they're relevant. And I'll give you an example. We're talking to an organization right now in New York City. I don't want to name them without their permission, but we're another organization, and the New York City organization is kind of regional. And another organization that we're talking with them is has a national footprint. One of the organizations, the regional organization, is very, very, very focused on research, and matter of fact, almost all of their money is research oriented for a health issue. This other organization is very patient oriented, very education oriented, very, and costs more to operate and run because they're conducting lots of programs. Well, the beauty of it is they both want the same things. They want to continue the research side. The regional entity wants a bigger national footprint. The smaller, the organization is more patient-friendly, not friendly is a bad word, more patient-oriented and education-oriented, wants to maintain that. So when we work through the discussions and we're all on the same side of the table trying to get to an end result, all of those legacy concerns will be talked about, will be provided for, will be ensured that they're going to continue as long as funding's available, and there's all kinds of little down in the weeds ways to do that. Percentages, ensuring that certain portions of budgets is going to be budgeted for that on a go-forward budget. When you get down to the weeds, all of that's done. The first thing is your question, though. How do we protect the macro context of this is interesting to us, this is kind of a non-starter for us, we want to make sure that we maintain this and protect it, and there's ways to do it. But a great, great question. Thank you.
You want to go into the future here?
Yeah, let's go into the future.
We're good.
And I like that we're getting to that, because that's
Switch. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Joe. All right.
You're off.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for that wonderful story. Exactly. It's wonderful to have your insight and your experience. All right, what we thought we would do from this point forward is exactly getting into, this is perfect, some of the questions that are coming to mind now that we are having a basis for why. And you may have walked into this room with some of that basis already. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the meat. And we've had a couple questions online about the presentation slides, and we will absolutely send the presentation slides to all of our online viewers when the presentation is complete. So you'll have that just like the handouts of those who attended in person. Okay, this is kind of an interesting idea. Maybe my organization is interested in this. What do I do first, and how do I get started? Is probably the first thing that you may think of. And the reality is, as Joe had mentioned, you got to take a real clear assessment of what you have. So what do you look like? What do you look like on paper? Where are your trends? And are my trends going down, or are they going up, and why are they going up and down? And what does that look like from a big picture? We like to say to kind of take a look at it from a 2 to 5 year standpoint, which is also a really good time to reassess your strategic initiatives. If you have them, great. If reassess them every 2 to 3 years is kind of the going thing that we have been experiencing with organizations now. into 5 years, the world is changing so quickly. Our strategic initiatives and how we might actually implement those may now be no longer efficient. So it makes sense to kind of look at it almost in a smaller snapshot, if you will, in that way. And you kind of have to believe what you see. So if we see that trends are going down, then we have to believe that. The other thing is, there's going to be aberrations. I don't know if you guys remember the Ice Bucket Challenge. Did you guys take the Ice Bucket Challenge? I made my kids take the Ice Bucket Challenge. $100 million in that Ice Bucket Challenge, and they had 3 million donors for that. But what we learned is that, although that's wonderful for ALS in that particular snapshot of life, what is the continuation of that, and how does that look going forward? And was that really an aberration, or is this a model that we can build upon? And in some cases, we have to take a look at some of those aberrations, whether they're positive or whether they're negative, and drop them out, and then look at the trend line that we have. And that gives us truly a better sense of what the health of our organization looks like. We have a chart that kind of explains the organization. You all may be very, very familiar with the reality of nonprofit for-purpose institutions, but we all get excited about an idea. Let's bring food to those individuals who don't have any, and then we have people who get around that idea, and we get motivated by that, and that can last 2 to 5 years. We move into this maturation stage where, okay, people believe in our idea, people believe in us as people and our purpose, and we're making a difference, and we can document that, and that's where kind of we're maturing. And then we get into a stagnant and complacent kind of phase, and that can last anywhere between 7 and 30 years, where we can see these bumps and excitements of what's happening, and we can also experience downturns, but we know something next is going to come, and we're staying the course, and we maintain our connections, and we're able to initiate funding and have purpose. The reality is, after about 25 years, an organization needs to have an event, a turnaround event of some sort, potentially to even reinvent themselves, as the environment may have changed, as the purpose may no longer be relevant. We've actually, been aware, and you may be even aware of the autism organizations. It was 10 years ago, where there was one organization. They actually ended up splitting into 2 organizations because that just seemed to make more sense at the time. So there's going to be an opportunity for some sort of shift, and we need to be aware of that. And then when that happens, is that going to drive us going back to what's exciting and what kind of made us in our startup mode, or are we on the path of decline? And sometimes the path of decline is the healthiest path. Our purpose may no longer be serving the needs of the community, and maybe we need to reinvent ourselves completely. So as we kind of look at this, we have some choices. Are we going to live out what our trend lines are? Are we going to maintain and stay the course from where we're at? I think it's not.
Sorry.
Right? You can do it. Thank you. Arrow down. There we go. All right. We can seek ways to reinvent ourselves. What I think, you're going to have to click here. Thank you. What I think that this conversation is about, and the examples that Joe has given, though, is that one opportunity that seems to make a lot of sense is the piece of working in a collaborative environment. And will a collaborative environment help my organization have that turnaround moment? And if so, what does that look like? And how can I move forward like that?
Honestly.
We'll go back to this. Good. So as we begin to think about, all right, if a collaborative portion is the way to go, and you may already be aware of institutions and organizations that are sort of like-minded. What does like-minded mean? And Joe had mentioned Dan wrote a book, and he and I revised that book last year, actually, on collaborations and finding a partner. Sometimes the most obvious is the one who's next door, particularly in the institution situation. Sometimes a potential partner has something, as Dan was giving the example of an organization that we're working with now, where one organization does research and the other organization is patient-oriented. Those two things are still working towards the same goal, but the partnership can have a value beyond what we can definitely do singly. The other thing is organizations may have something that we want. So we are looking at ourselves and looking at our strategic plan and saying, okay, if we could only just, move what we have into this role, have more feet on the street, have a certain kind of product delivery that we currently don't have. Well, one way to approach it might be to look at who actually has that going on now. And maybe the best way and the quickest way for us to achieve our goal as a total and organizational focus is to work with that organization going forward. So picking a partner, I think we had a specific question. How do you start these conversations? This might be tricky, and one of our last points is considering the messenger, but I'll mention that first. It's a hard thing, to say, hey, let's go to lunch. If your organization literally within sight of you is doing the exact same thing, and you may even stumble over each other as you're walking into potential funder organizations and asking for their assistance and their support. So it can be as simple as, let's go to lunch. It could be as simple as board members to board members having conversations, and that we've seen that work very, very successfully. Joe made several references to the impetus for some of these conversations coming from our donors, and those donors having conversations on the side are good. What I think is important is that what we have realized and noticed is that this is a lengthier process than you might imagine. It's more than one coffee. It's bumping into each other at conferences. It's bumping into each other at situations and saying, hey, what are you doing? This is what we're doing. What does it look like? And maybe we should work together. And that's the beginning of a seed to plant the idea. This happens to be a really good area where a third party makes sense. So whether that you contract with that third party or it's an outside individual, there's no context for what you're trying to get out of it. And sadly, many individuals come to the merger negotiation party thinking, what am I going to get out of it? And I've had this for-profit experience, and my bank merged, and now all of a sudden I don't even know what my cards are, and I don't even know who to call. And people go into these kind of situations in our for-purpose organizations with some of that legacy. And so some of those calls become tricky in that way. But when you come at it with a third party, or you come at it from a standpoint of our funders or our board members who are all about the mission and the passion for what the mission has to promise, it can be a little bit of an easier situation. It does take time. It absolutely takes time. There we go. The most important thing when you start coming together in instances like this, okay, I'll go to coffee with you, is that, hey, what could this look like? Joe even mentioned, if we could start with a blank page, what could we build together? That's how we as for-purpose institutions began to begin with. We sat down with a napkin, and we knew that there was a cause and a purpose, and we developed a reason around that and resources around that. And we went and we had passion and individuality about what we were doing. And so it can be the same way when we're already working institutions. We can work together based on what we can dream about. And we can ask questions about, are we going to save money? But because we're more about mission than the money, it's more important to ask, can we have a bigger impact? And if we can, what is that going to do for our organization? And so the bigger questions and the most safe way to start conversations about the scary merger word is to dream. Start with a blank page and imagine what you could build together. The business case is, although important and you need to think about the numbers, it's kind of loose. I like to think of it as, it's water in a bucket. This is not dirt and soil growing our new tree here. So we have information about our trend lines. We have information about our resources. We know how many people we have on our board. We know what our organization's purpose is. So it's important to look at that information and know that behind the scenes. But we're not going in like some of our for-profit friends saying, we have X resources and you have Y, and we want this. So, and it just makes sense, and we're just going to purchase you. In non-for-profit institutions are not really able to be purchased in that way, and it's not healthy to set up an organization in a way that you come in and take over, if you will. But they still need to be based in some sort of rational thinking about where our organizations are from a standpoint of health. So we take a look at these macro concepts. So when you're sitting down at the third or fourth conversation, whether it's with some volunteers or simply just at the CEO level or director level still, you're saying, okay, if we could start over, what would our brand look like? What kind of economies of scale can we have? When we move out from a very specific locale to a different region, what does that give us, and what does that build for us, for our organizations? And if we share simple things like paper, how much is that going to save us? Oh, you're using the same software device that we're using in order to get our funding and our resources in. Okay, that's a very, very quick and easy saving. And some of those quick wins are very successful and make a powerful message as we move forward towards an actual full collaboration scenario. Dan was mentioning just a moment ago about moving into this with what is it that we're going to come to the table with, and if it's not the same, if we're not all united ways with the exact same mission, but we have similar missions, how do we preserve what we have, and how do we preserve what we may have built? So it's very, very wise, and we consult with all of our partners on this, to begin with what you've got to have. In order for this organization to have gotten as far as it did, you had to have something. So what is that? And if that goes away, is that not going to serve the purpose of our mission anymore? So it's important to make a list of what our must-haves are. We're going to have to be flexible about those potentially, but we need to know what they are. And we need to feel good that we have them. The other thing is, as we're aware of an organization or many organizations who we may be partnering with, is there something that we know about the environment that is going to make this not powerful for us? It can be simple things as staff. It can be simple things as if the mission were to adjust this far off of what we're doing because of what we've experienced in the world, this is not going to fly and we're not going to be successful going forward. So those are important to look at as well. Really, it's kind of this balance between, okay, when we're going into this situation with something that I've built or I'm very part of and it feels very comfortable and good to me, and what do I need to have to build it to something even greater? And what do I need to let go of? And knowing that there's some things that I'm going to get and there's some things I'm going to have to let go of is a healthy stance into these negotiations. At the end of the day, when we begin talking about how we're going to meld, and we've come to this situation of, okay, we've got this great grandiose vision of what we want, it makes sense, our organizations are good together, and we've been in institutions where we're at this point, and it's a smart way to kind of move forward, and we sit down. Here are the 5 things you're going to talk about. Absolutely. And some of these things are going to be easy, and we're going to be able to say, yes, we all agree on this. Let's just move forward. Matter of fact, we were just working with an organization that just did this, particularly relating to their physical presence. Okay, we want to make sure we have offices in these 2 areas. Everyone agrees. Let's make sure we keep that. But we're definitely going to talk about governance. We're definitely going to talk about our finances and how we allocate and how we fundraise. We're definitely going to talk about our senior staff positions, and I'll give several examples of institutions that have roles that are powerful and important. We're going to need to make sure that we maintain how those powerful and important roles go forward. Sometimes it's simple, and we've got folks who are retiring, and then there's a kind of a clear path to how the governance is going to work out in terms of senior staff leadership. And other times it's not, and we have to get creative about how we build that. But the good news is it's a blank space. And then, of course, there's legacy and brand issues too. So we're working with an organization right now that wants to make sure that they maintain, it seems silly, but this is the way they've built their organization, an event, a very, very particular event that brings the community out in the droves, in the hundreds, and no matter what, this is the event that our organization was built on, and we're going to keep this. If you can think of the walks for cancer, those are types of things that, legacy event that is absolutely going to need to maintain. And as Dan had mentioned, although you can't bind a future board to maintain legacy or even governance or even senior staff issues for many years to come, you can protect that to a point where you know you're going to start out with a healthy organization in a combined state. When you're talking about the Big 5 and all the subcategories underneath that, it's important to maintain a flexibility. So going back to the DreamWorks scenario, and that we get to build a new organization, someone's going to say something potentially in our topics simply because they're passionate and feel very, very strongly about what needs to be maintained. And we need to be open and flexible about that. So, okay, if you absolutely believe this event needs to take place, let's talk about what really is the key essence of that event. And if that event is going to serve us, what pieces of it are going to serve us well for what amount of time, and what can we make sure is maintained before we move forward, and how far forward may it be relevant. Dan started this conversation talking about the speed of our world today with technology and in the environmental changes, and in today's world, our government and policy changes. 2 years from now, something that is very, very relevant may not be relevant at all. So if we kind of go into this thinking of governance, senior leadership, finances, with a standpoint of, we're not really negotiating what I can have and what you can have and what I can keep and what you can keep. We're really building a new organization. And that mindset is a much healthier standpoint for going forward. It is important, as we're going in trying to be flexible, though, to be very, very clear. And it's clear when we have our time ahead of these conversations to think about what we must have and what's important to our organizations, that we articulate that absolutely clearly. It's also important to be clear about our expectations based on our trend lines and the information that we came into this with. So if you're running, I'll go back to our program example, if we're running a program that that requires $100,000 or gains $100,000, it's unreasonable and sets a tone of negotiation versus collaboration if you go in saying, I want to make sure that program is maintained at $150,000, because we were going to grow that. And to maintain a future idea on a new combined organization that is probably going to work and operate very, very differently becomes a scary promise. So what is reasonable? All right, if I'm going to go into these organizations, and start a collaboration discussion and start to lay out what our new organization could look like, what am I going to end up with at the end of the day? Here's what you're going to end up with. You're going to end up with what we call a terms and conditions statements. If our organizations were to merge, because before we vote, nothing is really happening. So if our organizations were to merge and collaborate at some level, what is the position of our current CEO? What is the position of our vice president? And we'll talk about that, and we'll make sure that we've taken time to discuss the value of options in a group, and we'll very clearly lay that out. We'll very clearly lay out what funds that we have made sure have been purposed stay for that purpose going forward. We may have a sidebar foundation. We're actually working with an organization now that, and you'll see this more and more, where there's for-profit and non-for-profit entities working together. And so if we're one piece of a for-profit entity, or we have a foundation as part of our entity, what happens to that? So we'll talk about that, and we will absolutely lay out the definitions for where that goes. And then I had mentioned the facilities before. You'll be documenting this facility will stay intact, or this facility may go away, or as long as we have a physical presence in these 5 areas, then we have met our goal. So these conversations are probably happening, and we see this most likely with CEOs, senior staff, and potentially a few board volunteers. But in order for action to happen in a collaboration scenario that is beyond a memorandum of understanding, if we get into a further collaboration, physical statutory merger, we're going to need to educate our boards. And this process also takes time. I had mentioned before that the process of coming to the table takes time. Taking time with our boards is very, very important. And the process by which we educate our boards is calculated. We spend time thinking about what makes sense to talk about first. These are the kind of situations whereby if we go in with, oh, we got this, letter of intent from another organization where we are going to, we're going to merge and we're going to put our resources together and then we're going to build this new thing and we're going to grow by 5%. And the board gets that in a memo before the next meeting. You're all rolling your eyes. I can see that's not going to fly. So it's very, very important to spend time talking to your boards about this on the side as little pieces. Nothing is definite. And we need to make sure that we take our time and plan thoughtfully about how and when we speak about these things. Because the reality is, as a CEO or as a director who's leading this initiative, our reputation's on the table. Our reputation's on the table. And from a board standpoint, if the approach, and we've seen this, if the approach is going in and sets up everyone's, rivals everyone's hair on their backs, and we don't get anywhere after the first meeting, and everyone says, I'm not interested, like Joe said, what are you talking about, collaborate, sit down, you may lose an entire generation of a board, 3, 4, 5 years, before you can even bring this discussion to purpose again. And although that sometimes happens, and we have seen that and come back 5 and 6 years later and restarted the conversation, it's smarter to take some of this time up in advance and plan out thoughtfully how and when you're going to bring up what information to your boards. So the very first thing is, all right, we've got this idea, we spent some time thinking about it, we're thinking about how we might bring these ideas up to our board. The way that McCormick Group operates and the way that we've seen work most successfully in other organizations is to develop a design team. So who's on the design team? We've got a CEO or some other version of senior staff, maybe 2. We've got board members, 2 or 3, depending on our board size. We've seen it all the way up to 6, 7, 8 board members, I believe, coming to the table. We may have some finances, we may have some legal representation. Sometimes these folks need to be on board as well. And we create this design team. And we like the name design team because it allows us to think we're not negotiating. It's not a merger team. It's not an acquisition team. It is a team that allows ourselves to build something new together. And as this team comes together, it's healthy for us to take a step back with coming in with all of our ideas and all of our base information about our finances if they were together. There's options. We don't have to go all the way to a statutory merger if we're not ready. We can simply start with a memorandum of understanding. And we're only going to work together on this program. Something that we've seen work really well with United Ways is starting with the 211 program. So they have a program that allows their individual organizations to work together without fully coming together in their organizational status of resources and finances, and board governance stays separate. We just work together on this project. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to make sure that the board is feeling successful about their choice to approve a further merger. But here's what's important about this, and you'll see it on the slide that Dan had mentioned earlier as well. As the complexity of our potential options for collaboration increase, the potential benefits increase. So I believe on the blue chart that Dan had brought up, you saw, everyone who did some form of collaboration believed that it was valuable. But way back, I don't know if you noticed, on the very left-hand side, there was a joint venture opportunity. And there was less success feeling from just a joint venture. And that's because it's easy to say, let's work together on this project. And you'll do your piece and I'll do my piece. But, we'll be together. And some of those we even see happen at a handshake level. But over time, those handshakes, become the details around the handshakes become unclear. There is turnover that positions an organization to not necessarily know what the handshake was about. So the work is definitely more complex as you move towards a full statutory merger, but the emphasis and the essence of what needs to be designed has greater benefit over a longer time. But the good news is there's a way to do it. Oh, we'll go backwards. Go forward. There we go. Okay. So we'll kind of go through the process that I was just mentioning in summary form, and then we'll talk about the timing of it, and we can go from there. The first thing, and Joe mentioned this as well, is to get everybody in the room. And maybe it takes 10 coffees or 5 phone calls or 3 meetings to do that. But let's get everybody in the room and start talking about it. And it's important to be face to face. If you do it over the phone or even Skype now is wonderful, but there's emotion. And what's important at this level is to build trust. It's really hard to build trust over a non-physical connection. And if the trust is not built in a way that makes everybody feel comfortable, it's going to be very, very difficult to build something new that we all agree on. The discussions are about mission, not money. We've mentioned that before, and that is the overriding guiding principle of all of our discussions that we will have. Then we're going to discuss the big 5, and we're going to take note of exactly what our current concerns are and what our must-haves are. We'll capture those must-haves and those concerns in tentative agreements. We gave you an example of, yes, we will maintain X facility in this location for 2 or 3 years. That ends up forming itself into a plan and agreement to merge document. This is the document upon which our boards will vote. Sometimes if our organizations are membership organizations, our members will also need to vote and approve this document. This is a document that will need to be filed, and in some organizations, in some states, you have to go through other legal and filing processes and approvals from the Attorney General's office in order to actually execute the full statutory merger. Memorandum of understanding, letters of intent to have a different purpose, but we will do that. Sometimes our bylaws will need to be modified, and our articles of incorporation may even need to be modified as well. The key here is that we don't start out saying, well, here's my bylaws, here's your bylaws, let's put them together. This happens very, very at the end of the day. After we've done the dreaming and after we've talked about how we're going to build an organization, okay, now to make sure that we support it with documentation so that further boards can operate in the way that we dreamed that made the most sense, let's document that. And then we'll vote, but nothing happens until our organizations vote. We often get asked, okay, this seems like a lot, and I know that there's time ahead of all this and conversations happening, over the phone and on the side about when these things can happen. So how long is this? We've seen the process take 6 months. We've seen organizations come in and say, everybody, we've already been talking, everyone's on the same page, this is going to be quick and easy, we'll be done in 3 months. It never happens in 3 months. There are many pieces of it that need to take more time than we always think. Generally, these take between 8 and 12 months, and by these, I mean the process of the negotiation, the setting up of the new organization, the creation of the new vision. Actually implementing some of the things that happen based on what we all agreed on can take 2 years. We, as Joe mentioned earlier, the benefits will come, but they may not be for 2 or 3 or 4 years out in terms of what is it we're trying to build. If you think about a startup organization may see some quick blips, but the real organization is not going to be seen in its full sense for 3 to 5 years generally. So this is the process of such, not necessarily the way that the outcome reads. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan, who's going to talk a little bit more about the pieces of the way this works. And we'll take questions at the end.
Well, we can take some questions now if you have some specific questions. I think this might be a good time. Any thoughts?
I just have well, maybe it's two elephants in the room, a question about both of them, which I think could be a barrier. And one is the CEO that is unsuccessful in leading the new organization in some cases, and oftentimes the board chair that is unsuccessful in going forward as chair. What, if any, provisions have you seen or witnessed that make those two sort of challenging gray areas more comfortable?
Well, indeed, there's 2 sides of the story. Thanks, Glenn, for that question. There's really kind of 2 sides of the story. So one side is in the negotiation process, sometimes allowances have to be made. Mm-hmm. So one organization either feels really, really strongly about its CEO and kind of demands that CEO is the CEO at the end of the day. Okay. And the other, and then we just went through a situation, and I wouldn't suggest that this volunteer leader is not adequate. As a matter of fact, by all indications they probably are very adequate. But we just went through a situation in which the CEO was named from a larger organization, and part of that trade-off was a board member became chairman of the board of the new organization from the smaller organization.
Correct.
So there was kind of a balance. We also balanced executive committees, if you will, of 8 people, 4 from each entity. This is only a 2-party merger. So the first part of that question is there are realities of negotiation, even though we don't like to think about this negotiation. There's realities of negotiation that requires maybe not the ideal from the standpoint of what we think is the best person in the room,
Sure.
either on the volunteer side or the staff side. That's part of it. The other part of it is that Joe mentioned that unlike for-profit mergers frequently, there's not this, I'll tell you, I got this, I got that, I'm buying this, I'll buy that, I own this, you own that, here's your money, go home. So there's usually not a golden parachute, handcuffs, ankle bracelets, whatever you want to call them, and nonprofits are for purpose. We're not big into paying massive bonuses to get this deal done. Typically, I've seen it attempted, but it's rare. So that then becomes, there's a chapter in the book that I wrote about, Kim and I revised about nonprofit organizations. Early on, it says, solve this CEO problem first. And by the way, we market that book under Ambien CR. It will put you to sleep, and the only side effect is paper cuts. And but anyway, but this needs to be solved, because otherwise a CEO, and I don't mean to speak ill of any CEO in the world, but they have a self-preservation issue here, you know. And yes, they love their organization. Yes, they love the mission, but they're not willing to take the food out of their babies' mouths for it. I don't understand. But anyway, so there's this. So we've got to get that question solved so that we know that our 2 or 3 or 5 or 7, imagine that, and we've done it, executives in the room are in support of whatever that new model is going to look like. So we actually put some of that cart before the horse. So here we are in these early days of discussion, and we got people in the room who goes like, I'll be the CEO, and somebody else in the room said, I don't want to be the CEO, and somebody said, I got a good chance of being the CEO. And what we don't want is a free-for-all, because that detracts away from the overall discussion. So what I usually do is take them to lunch. And so what Kim and I do, we go to lunch, and we go like, you know what, I'm just looking at this, and it looks like that Jill is going to be the new CEO. I mean, it's kind of shaping up that way. How do you feel about that? Well, that could probably work for me. Well, you want to make a run at her, and you think you got the votes? And then, and I said, look, what if we make sure that 1, you're going to have a job, 2, it's going to be protected for a while, 3, it's a great title, 4, you don't have to move. And sometimes, by the way, they're instead of professional drivers around this, Glenn, they're a very interpersonal relationship. I mean, I have literally sadly, I've had CEOs sat across the table from me, almost in tears, saying, my wife has a job in this town, my kid's a senior in high school, I'm not making this up, I can't move, and I can't take a cut in pay, I can't move, and I can't take a cut in pay. So in order to get that person coming on board and interacting fully, we have to cut a deal.
Got it.
We have to say, Bob, you're all set. You don't have to move. Your kid can stay in the high school. You're going to get a great title. You're not going to lose a thing in salaries and benefits. And then I have to go back to the others in the room and say, okay, in order to get this deal done, we got to get Bob. Here's what we've got to have. Now, so you want to bite that bullet, or do you want to fight harder for some, And then usually when you just stop and say, look, you need somebody in this role anyway. You might be able to get somebody a little bit cheaper than Bob. We may be talking about making or breaking this deal on a $30,000 price tag. I mean, in other words, you fire Bob, hire somebody else, and in the meantime, you got all this brain damage, and you lose all this organizational history and culture and memory. I mean, that's not the kind and gentle way to move into this. And that actually, Glenn, thank you, brings up an important factor. When we're doing these kinds of consolidations and mergers with nonprofits, we have to do them while we're flying the plane. We're rebuilding an airplane while we're flying it. And I'm an old pilot, and I understand the complexity of this. So we're rebuilding an airplane while we're flying it. We still got to raise money. We still got to work with our constituents. We still got to do the care and feeding of the board. We still got to go visit donors. We still got to go. We still got to. And besides that, the complexity of just getting through the day when we walk in the office with a Starbucks thinking everything's grand and the world falls apart, and we spend the next 9 hours trying to fix something. So we're constantly aware that this has to blend with how with continuing to function. If we stopped what we're doing and just merged, and by the way, the real world doesn't do that either. I don't know whether you've tried to book after the American Airlines and U.S. Airways merger. I don't know whether you tried to book an air flight or not, but you had to call. I mean, their reservation system didn't meld, and you had to. And so you couldn't get a boarding pass, and you couldn't get an online. I mean, it was just like crazy. I mean, it's a wonder they survived what they did. But anyway, so we're cognizant of that. That's a critical factor. It's got to be solved. So thanks for that question. Others? Yeah.
How do you handle your funders because if you've got several organizations, one foundation's giving to X, Y, Z, another's giving ABC, now you're talking about this merger, how do you have that conversation with these funders?
Yeah, it's not so much how you have the conversation, it's more about when. And so you want to make sure that you are, I don't know, I'm beginning to get into this farm metaphor thing. So you want to make sure that the cow is tipped over far enough that it's probably going to happen. Otherwise, you're exciting them, or maybe even turning on a water spigot you can't shut off. You go to a big time funder and say, we're thinking about merger. And he says, great idea. Let me know when you're done. I'll give you some money. Until then, you're off. See, you're starting you see what I'm saying? So the timing, you've got to get far enough into discussions that unless something blows up the system, it's probably going to complete. Then we're going to go to our funders, and we're going to go to the big ones one-on-one. And Joe's a master at this, by the way. He's raised about, I don't know how many billions of dollars for the United Way over the years. But you go to your funders one-on-one, and sometimes if you have a positive a funder that may be on your board who knows about this and is in support of it, we've done this on more than one occasion. That person may decide to have an event and invite major funders and other major constituencies and say, we just want to inform you a little bit of what day, and we're behind this 100%, and now all of a sudden it's a third party kind of doing this on your behalf, and you look smarter for it. So, but yeah, timing is a more critical issue than what you tell them. What you're going to tell them is what you know. We're either having discussions we think it's going to end up being, we're going to be in some consolidated form, or we're not sure how it's going to work yet, and you just don't want it to outrun you. Because the further it gets away from you, the harder it is to manage not only the message, but the timing and the process and everything else. Other quick questions before I kind of finish up here? Okay.
Dan, I just think the timing thing again, I know we just saw the chart, but we had a big merger happening and it looked good, and a number of our senior people were saying, it's going to be done in 3 months. And we couldn't stop them from saying that. And there's no way it was going to happen in 3 months. But they were making promises to leaders in the community. Oh, this is no problem. We know how to do this. It's going to happen. And I'm like, stop.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Joe.
Process.
I appreciate you saying that, Joe, because so I'm a for-profit guy, and let's say, and I love golf. So does Joe, by the way. We go out on the golf course, and we say, you know what, we ought to merge. And the guy goes like, yeah, we ought to merge. And the guy like, well, what do you think? He said, well, we're bigger, we're smaller, we got this, we got that. Yeah. And then you come back and you say, let's do it. You come back and the lawyers get in the room, and the CPAs get in the room, and the bean counters get in the room, and they iron out whatever that deal is. And I don't know, and the planning agreement is like this thick because they charge by the pound. and then you look at that deal, and either there's a letter of intent that spells out the primary, you're going to get this, you're going to get that, I'm going to get this, you're going to get that, and the deal is done. And because it's based on a numerical decision, it's based on a monetary decision. And we've been saying, Joe said it, we said it, this is about mission. But in a volunteer environment, nobody's going to make any money. Nobody's going to get rich. Nobody's going to sell a bunch of stock. Nobody's going to be Mark Zuckerberg. Wouldn't that be fun? Anyway, nobody's going to be that, right? So what are we talking about? We're talking about what's critical to us from the legacy perspective, what's critical to us from an organizational perspective, a mission perspective, our own emotion. My mother was on this board. I remember when we did Girl Scouts years ago, there were people who sat in a room with tears in their eyes saying, we can't lose this troop number. That was my mother's troop number. I remember sitting in a board meeting with a group about talking about lymphoma and leukemia, and one of the groups was one of the biggest hurdles of that discussion, took like 2 meetings, was a logo design. This logo, because it was started and there was an emotional personalization attachment to it, and we're going like, okay, let's use the blood drop. That's good. That's good. The blood drop's in, and so there's it's never lost on us that, and I think quite honestly that's why to be a little bit sales oriented, I think that's one of the reasons we are asked to do these kind of things, is because it's not just let's merge. Show me your numbers, here's the deal. Because, we just went through a 3-hour meeting in Toms River, New Jersey about governance, about how many board members you get. How many board members you two guys decide to merge, you got a board of 25, you got a board of, how many is on your board,
16.
16, okay, so now we got 50, right? We got like 40 something, no, I can't add, we got 41, so we're thinking like, do we want a 41 person board? Is that smart? Okay, who gets to go? Okay, you're out, you're in, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're in. All right, let's draw straws, No. So this whole process of negotiation and how it works. And by the way, while we're on that subject, one of the interesting things about board governance is that you can almost never find a way to do it on a strict metric. How much money you got? You got $2 million. How much money you got? You got $500,000. That's 4. We get 4. You get 1. Somebody goes, 1? Whoa, I got more to say than that. So finding those strict metrics, whether it's finance, whether it's geography, whether it's demographics, whether it's number of members, whether it's programs, whether it's all hard to do, and to make this a straight. It doesn't work like the House of Representatives, and it rarely works like the Senate. It's rarely equal board members, and it's rarely proportion based on some metric. So finding that mix between proportion based on a metric and a Senate where the boards are equal, 2 from each state, is hard to do. And it's a big discussion and a long discussion. And I think that's one of the reasons that, and working the halls to solve CEO problems and other kinds of problems, is one of the reasons that our company has been so successful for more years than I like to count in this field. I think it's because I will tell you that when Joe took me in to meet the guy upstairs here, his counterpart Brian Gallagher, and Brian said, first of all, he said, how much money am I going to save? CEO, right? And I looked at him and I said, none. You're probably not going to say, it might cost you money for a while, We're going to do our best, but don't plan on a big break. That's not fair. Tell him he's going to, we'll save you a fortune. Not true. Then the second question was, why should I hire you? And I said, well, if you want a great business case, hire IBM Global Services. If you want a great research on this and have an academic case, hire McKinsey. If you want somebody to roll up their sleeves and go down and talk to your people and bring in mergers, hire me. And I was fortunate enough to be hired, so that's good. Well, let me kind of close out here, and then we'll... So one of the things that we're working with an entity right now, and we had a discussion with them just a few weeks ago, And they said to me, well, we're working with one entity, and another entity is getting ready to be entered into the conversation. And so one entity hired us, the bigger entity hired us. And they said, well, we're concerned because their percentages of blah, 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 blah is very, very different from ours. And how are we going to get them to up to our same percentages of what we spend our money on, how we approach the mission? And I go like, why would you want to do that? And they go like, well, because this is what we do. And I go like, well, you're interested in them because of what they do and what they do well. So what we should try to be focusing our energies on is how we get the best out of what they do and the best out of what we do. How we literally capitalize on the best of everything, not the tyrannical, we got to get them like us. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to not expect in this discussion that your organization is going to change too, at every level. I mean, if we do this well, it's going to be kind of seamless to probably the donor base, it's going to be kind of seamless to our constituency, somewhat seamless to staff that's down in the ranks, but the upper echelons of board leadership, the upper echelons of staff are going to systemically change, and you just need to embrace that and go like, yeah, I know we're going to be a little different, but we're going to get the best out of what we got. And I like to keep us to think about this. It's when you think about merger, you think my organization is merging into yours, and there are a lot of forms. There are asset purchase agreements, there's asset transfers, there's all kinds of forms, and sometimes rather than statutory mergers, and sometimes there are conditions that an organization may be facing that leans it towards one or the other. Or there might be some legacy issue of a gift that's in a will or an expectancy that requires certain kinds of odd forms, and that's something that your consulting team, your legal team will certainly advise you well upon. But and I think Kim has said this earlier as well, but one of the things that we like to think of in the nonprofit merger environment is that it's not what do you want and what do I want, but more it's about both of us getting on the same side of the table and looking at the problems that we can solve collectively together better, how we can have more impact. And when we kind of set it up that way, where we're looking, and that's why Kim talked about the DreamWorks. And yeah, we got to do due diligence. That's why we shape this conference away from some of those specifics. I mean, it's not time to get down in the weeds yet. Let's figure out how to get everybody in a room. But when she talked about, if we're both looking at this from the same side of the table, if we're both doing the DreamWorks, if we're both thinking about what could it be, and then we say, well, this is a problem, this is a barrier, but not this is my barrier and this is your barrier. Because they're basically, there's people in this room who are volunteers. I mean, some of you I know are staff members, but there are people in this room, and maybe some people online, who are volunteers, and you're giving your most precious resource. You're giving away 3 hours that you can't get back for something you care about. You're giving away 3 hours of your life for something you care about. The rest of us are trying to make money. So, but anyway, if you think about that, that's important. I mean, the fact that one is willing to give of themselves for something that's bigger than themselves is a big deal. I mean, it's never lost on me. It's, you could be playing golf, you could be playing with your grandkids, you could be doing all kinds of things, but no, you could be reading a book, but you're here trying to make your organization better. And if we can get everybody thinking about that, we have a better outcome. And that's why you can't do it in 3 months. That's why you can't do it in 3 months. So the other thing I hope we've transmitted to all of you today is there's nothing to be worried about, because nothing's going to happen until you decide to vote. Now, that said, as I indicated, you can turn on a water spigot that's hard to turn off. You can get energy built up around this until it's too late to stop. You can get funders worked up and say, hey, this is going to happen, until one of the funders says, no, I'm not giving you, until one funder like Hallmark says, I'm not giving you any more money until you get this done. We've also, as a matter of fact, we're working in a place right now where a major funder of two organizations, a private foundation, a major funder of two organizations, when this discussion kind of just began to shape up a little bit, one of those organizations lost a CEO. One of, they left, and so, on good terms, it wasn't like fire. And so they're saying, you know what, now might be a good time to have a discussion with one of our neighbors. And so they were worried about what does our funder think, and one of the funders was setting up, the funder guy, the big foundation, was sitting on the board. And he says, I've been wondering when we're going to have this discussion. He said, my foundation will underwrite it. And his private foundation is paying us and paying for all of the whole transition idea and participating fully, involved in the meeting, showing up and everything. And it's really refreshing to see somebody willing to support this idea, knowing at the end of the day it's going to be a better play for them. And so the bottom line is, once we get this thing, and we kind of glossed over this a little, but once we get this plan and agreement to merge that Kim was talking about with all of the terms and conditions, both legacy and the Big Five and other things, governance and all that, and then we modify documents, then your board receives this as a package. You've been keeping them informed all along. You stand in front of them and say, this is a good thing for us to do. We're comfortable with this in this environment. Let's vote yes. And if they vote yes, we got a deal. If they vote no, we either start all over or we scrap it. Rarely, this has happened. As a matter of fact, it's happened within the last 6 months. Rarely, but sometimes we get into these discussions, and even if we might be pretty much on the same side of the table with the other people, we learn things about the organization that makes it, that we realize as a third party from outside, even regardless of what the entity feels is comfortable and wants to do, we realize that there are issues here that's going to quintessentially impact their success negatively. And we have actually, to our detriment, told people, we think you've gone far enough in this discussion, and we would, from our perspective, we would not recommend you proceed, and here's why. And, we're not about, we've been in this business for a long, long time, and it's not because we didn't actively advise our clients to what we think is in their best interest. I will brag a little bit and say we were with United Way, we've been working with United Way since 2008, and they typically would not keep people around. We've watched some other consultants come and go, so they typically wouldn't keep people around. It's not performing. And in addition to that, we go out without them. They send us out to represent the company, knowing we're not going to throw them under the bus. And because I think that integrity of, is it right for you, is an important part of what we do. So. Well, we talked a little bit about this, and I went to a Disney World. A buddy of mine talked me into going to Disney World a number of years ago for a marketing conference, and I'm like the worst marketer in the world. I don't even think about it. Thank goodness for Kim, but I don't even think about it. I just go like, yeah, I'm having a good day, so that's my marketing. And so he taught me into going with the promise that we play a lot of golf, because I play lots of golf. So I go like, Orlando, the winter golf, sure. Oh, they're having something, And so I actually attended the session, which is kind of a surprise for me, because I skipped a lot of classes in college and high school. But in any event, I attended. And after Mickey and Goofy came in and danced all around, and they played that song that stays in your ear all the time, I'm not going to hum it. You'll hate me forever. But they played that song, and then all of a sudden the screen just went black. And then this, in bright yellow and orange letters, this thing came up. It said, facts can be negotiated, but perceptions can't. And so if there's one thing you need to know from this session today about nonprofit mergers, is that that people bring preconceived perceptions to this whole idea. And the fact is, it can be whatever you want it to be. It can be as complex as you want to make it. It can entail as many of your conditions as you want it to be. It can be as simple as you'd like it to be. It can be like, yeah, you know what, let's do this, let's make sure our money's right, and let's go forward. It can be a 3-page document. It can be It can take a few months. It can take a year. And so that's the fact. It's not the bank merger where you are driving home tonight and you see some guys on a ladder putting a burlap bag over Fifth, Third, and Seventh Bank. And when you drive Monday morning, you realize your checks have changed and it's now, 6th, 8th, 9th Bank. And so it's not that kind of a thing. These are kinder, gentler ways of putting organizations together for the betterment of the causes that they represent. So with that, we can take more questions, and thank you very much for your attendance, and those of you who attended on the web, and Joe for your help with this, and Jonathan for your assistance. Thanks a lot, and for United Way for allowing us to use this absolutely beautiful facility today. So thanks again, and appreciate it. Thanks. Kim and I and Joe are happy to take questions.
I actually have a question, from online.
Okay.
The question is specifically about or it is similar to your legacy comment, but it's about cultures. If two organizations have cultures that are distinctly different, and you begin talking about collaborations, how do you work around protecting your culture?
That's a good question, isn't it? So this is terrible way to approach this, I guess, and so I'm not sure this is exactly what you're looking for, but so it depends. First of all, we need to figure out what that is. So is it a culture because there's been a careful consideration of how this entity, a culture is defined as basically every kind of intangible about how an organization works together and functions, and that's not exactly clinical, but it's a basic idea. So if it's that, and it's been kind of carefully orchestrated, it's protected, it's carefully observed, there are just protocols that everyone observes, that's like a real culture, and that those things are kind of infectious and kind of emanate from the top down typically, and if it's that, then there should be a clear discussion about our culture and why our culture is our culture. If it's the culture light, which is they don't do things like we do things, that's culture light. Culture light is, well, we do this and they don't do this. Or let me tell you another example. Culture light is one board being very hands-on and very into the minutia of every detail. I see smiles. And another culture is the board is very policy-oriented and very strategically oriented and not engaged. That's kind of a cultural play. And so if it's that, those are more conditions than culture. So we have to determine if it's a culture that is deep in the organization, or if it's a condition that could be modified or would be modified pretty easy. I can tell you on the short version, another short version of this, culture shifts with size. So if you've got 10 people and the other organization has 40, it's going to be more like 40 than it is like 10 at the end of the day. When you start melding those people together, they're going to work more like 40 than the 10 work like 10. The 10 is not going to change the 40 as much as the 40 is going to change the 10. Does that make sense? So it's kind of that. So there's just so many factors, but I think it starts with determining whether it's a real culture that is cultivated, that is purposeful, that is meaningful, that has strength underneath the concepts, that has been there for a long time, as opposed to you guys work different from us. So I think it's because people are more adaptable than you would ever dream. They're just, give them a break. They're pretty smart. There are a lot of smart people. So. Good question. Others? All right, hearing none. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us, especially just before spring break on a beautiful Washington day. It's going to be snow tomorrow. I suggest you take off the rest of the afternoon and do something fun. But thank you very much for attending and being part of this. And there's still some no donuts, unfortunately. What happened to that? But there's some stuff in the back of the room. Nash on, please grab that. And thanks again for attending us. And if we can help you in any way, just let us know. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Joe, we appreciate it, buddy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Got it?
All right.
Okay.
Yep, good to go.
Don't go away. We're gonna
Thanks for having me.